we have these programs that were developed on the savannah over millions of years, and it probably was a good idea to, or a good bias to go with the loud, boisterous guy when you're being attacked or something. But it's just not a great heuristic for modern society today. And so I think, another version of this question is like, what is leadership? And I think it's a lot of things, but it involves integrity, empathy, vision, and this ability to simplify the complexity of our situation into a story that a group can follow and helps them be more successful. It's that ability to provide strategic thinking and focus on the long term. And none of these things require volume.
Hello, and welcome to episode 227 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts, along with strategies for success. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we will air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, leave a review or rating. I would love to hear from you. Also, leaving a review or a rating is going to help others find the show. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Greg Weinger has spent over 20 years proving that introverts and unconventional thinkers can thrive in leadership. A seasoned product and technology executive, he has helped scale startups 10x to 70 million in revenue, leading teams. They'll build market-leading digital products and drive business growth. A Stanford graduate, he studied English literature, creative writing, and software engineering, giving him a unique ability to blend technical expertise, storytelling, and strategic thinking to make complex ideas accessible and actionable. All right. Well, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Greg. Greg, it's so good to have you on today.
Well, thanks so much, David. It's really great to be on this show.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the work you do around introversion. You have a podcast as well. Tell us about yourself and your journey to the work you're doing now.
Sure. So I can tell you a bit about my introvert origin story. It goes back to the very beginning, as I'm sure you know. I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, which is kind of a small conservative city in Illinois. It's not part of Chicago. And my dad was a doctor. Both of my parents are Jewish, and so I'm kind of this product of Jewish immigrant culture. So, you grow up comfortable, but this sense that you're slightly different. We have different holidays and go to a different place for church, but also this kind of sense that you really want to fit in. And in retrospect, it's not totally rational. I experienced very mild prejudice growing up. It's kind of in questions or, oh, that's interesting, about being different. But my parents were definitely excluded from things, and their parents very much in the early 20th century. So I'm part of this multi-generation project to assimilate and to try to reach the highest levels in America. And so I really took that program on. I was a high achiever in high school, valedictorian as part of this all-American swim team. I went to Stanford. And so, I felt like I was doing well. This is, in seems like a good thing for your ego to go, to go to a place like that. But in reality, so some of my classmates are like, in my year, Rachel Maddow, John Levin was my actual roommate. He's the current president of Stanford. Peter Thiel is kicking around there, Janet Evans. There, you can kind of go on. When you're in this kind of crowd, super driven, really accomplished people, it's not the best thing for your ego, actually. And so it kind of forced me to think, like, what's my place in the world? Some, there were, positive things in that. I got into the creative writing program there, and this was kind of a revelation to me because I had just been going and going, and then it was kind of gave me this ability to have a bit of distance on myself and kind of look at my life. And for a long time, I felt like this was the only place I could truly be myself, which I think this is kind of a quintessential introvert experience. Of course, I didn't have these terms and this ability to reflect on it at that point, but it's a kind of became a core part of who I am. Just one other note or a story from that time. So the kind of showing the kind of people I'm hanging out with. So my roommate has said, I said, "What are you doing?" One of these days, and he's like, "Well, I'm going to study because I'm going to apply for this Rhodes Scholarship." And I was like, "What? What's that about?" It's like, "Well, you spend a couple years in England." And I said, "Well, that sounds cool. I want to do that too." So I'm not Rhodes Scholarship material, but I applied and I got recommendations and all that. And my advisor kind of raised an eyebrow, and I was like, "Okay, well, I'll send one." But I got interview as a finalist in the state of Illinois. So I traveled to Chicago and got a suit, and I'm go into one of these buildings, and it's the evening before. It's this old beautiful Gothic building across from the Art Institute of Chicago, one of these kind of halls of power, wood paneled ceilings. It kind of looks a little Harry Potterish inside. And the mission for that evening is you have to it's like a mixer, and you have to find the judges and schmooze them and impress them. And so I just utterly bombed at this whole thing. And, I'm trying to, it's hard for me to break in. I could see other people were kind of in my situation. They're kind of sitting on the sidelines, but there are people who are clearly, you know, just at ease in this situation, easily chatting people up and that kind of thing. So it's like, you know, that is another indicator. It's like, okay, this situation isn't natural for me. The next day, there's this panel interview, and I bombed out also. It was these I also, having grown up in the Midwest, I was very conservative, still very conservative in a lot of these places. I went to California and I went wild, became a, a liberal. And so some of these things came up in the conversation. The interview kind of devolved into like bashing, the silly little liberal kid. And so it didn't, this was a tough experience, but it really kind of showed me that sometimes of these, these are clearly not situations that I'm suited for. So setting all that aside, a lot of these things came up in retrospect, but I went off, and when I graduated from college, I spent some time trying to be a writer. I was working on a novel, but I was also working in the computer industry, and I kind of fell in. It was the dot-com era, and I got into that. At first, it was to support myself while I'm writing on the side, doing both. But then it became a passion. It became the most interesting thing for me. I moved into that. Long story short, eventually wanted to rise in as a leader in these organizations, and I got into management.
Yeah, so I very much relate to the struggle that you described with the networking event and then the
Hmm.
interview. And so many introverts that don't understand their introversion, that those types of things are a huge struggle.
Right. It was kind of baffling to me. So, and it seemed like these things are major flaw. This is my perspective at the time. If the program is to assimilate and rise to these other levels, and it's like, well, this is a major roadblock. I don't seem to be suited for this. And so my lesson at the time kind of was, in a way, was to retreat and to seek out roles and things that were, didn't put me in those situations.
Yeah. How did you determine that you were an introvert? Where did you get those words and then at what point did you embrace it instead of, thinking something was wrong with you?
Right. About 2 years ago.
Okay, wow. Okay. That's great.
Yeah. So it's been a long struggle. Yeah. It's like my introvert coming out story.
Yeah.
But I mean, I knew this longer than that.
Yeah.
And but what was going on for me was that in my mind, if I'm an introvert, this means I can't be a leader. I had I had that idea in my mind. Totally false. I was a hold of some bad facts, but this was this was the bind I was in, that and in the information, that you've known for quite some time, and there's just amazing content out there, particularly starting 2012, 2013, there's just kind of an explosion of awareness about all the research and, all just the knowledge that introverts, what is introversion, and all the capabilities and strengths that we have. And all this information wasn't reaching me. So it was a little bit more about how I reached the conclusion. So, like in the workplace, I've I spent 20 plus years kind of rising in different roles and, growing as a leader. And, part of that whole program is you're taking these tests. There's Myers-Briggs and, all the different, like the DISC and all these things. And so I kept seeing on my test, coming up what's this I here, this introversion. And then I saw that and I was like, oh, that seems bad, because it's going
Uh,
against the program. And then, so what would happen would be I would take the test and I would be, and I'm a really good test taker. That was part of just my natural strength as, I would be looking to give the answer, the less introverted answer, the more extroverted answer. So and kind of, and I kind of knew what I was doing. But it was part to fool myself, but it also to fool anyone else who might be looking at it. So it was just, I was really in denial about all this stuff. But it seemed, I had that belief that this was a flaw. And then I also believed that with the right amount of effort, I could just kind of stamp out some of these tendencies.
did
Um,
you did it say that you were an E? Did you get it to do that?
I can't recall, but yeah, it definitely toned down some of the, what would have been my honest answer is that, I don't love confrontation naturally. I don't,
Yeah.
and honestly, it's when I got to the point of being a senior leader, an executive reporting to a CEO, where like things kind of came to a head, and it was I was just working, like I was just completely surrounded by extroverted executives, and they were really challenging me. There's very confrontational, very loud, very hard to break in, and all these things. And so I started doing this work with an executive coach, and he did helped me get into my past, and that was the deep work that led me to acceptance about this. And then I kind of, I mean, he wasn't even encouraging of, putting labels on things, but I found it empowering to read all these things and to identify with this because it really helped me to accept these parts of my personality.
Yeah, yeah. The Myers-Briggs was powerful for me, just like, okay, I am an introvert and there's strengths that come with it. Was there any other resources that were particularly powerful for you?
Well, it really started with Susan Cain's book,
Okay.
Quiet. I spent a lot of time with that, and then I started doing research and seeing there's so many, you know, there's Barbara Conweiler has a number of books. It's, Jen Graneman's website. There's all these things, and you start to see people around you, and then you like realize, okay, I'm in good company here.
Yeah, yeah, you're definitely not the first to say that Susan Cain's book was powerful. She really helped people to see, hey, you know what? There's nothing wrong with you. In fact, you have great strengths. And two out of the three I've had on the show. So I've had Jennifer Conweiler and Jen Greneman on the show. So they are wonderful, and they've also helped many people.
Yeah, absolutely. They make you feel comfortable.
Yes, yeah. So what is a strength that you have because you're an introvert?
Sure. Well, part of it is we think before we speak, and then I think that's kind of a gateway, kind of a skill or talent, because I believe that's what gives you the ability to have more perspective. I really like to absorb a problem and chew on it, and not even fully consciously on it, to really That's where I do my best work in thinking. So there's depth of thought and also feeling. Increasingly, I'm more in touch with the feeling part than I have been in the past. But things that other people see and recognize as ability to remain calm, to be calm in situations, and that really has a lot of power because it impacts others as well as yourself. It kind of calms situations, helps people be more, yeah, I don't know if rational is the right word, but it helps people give people the same distance from maybe the reactivity they're having in the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And introverts, we do have a gift for thinking, and we do need some space and time to do that. But that can you described earlier that you are working with a lot of extroverted executives, and they're expecting immediate answers, right? Most of the
Hmm.
time. And you
Hmm.
have to be able to show, you know what, give me some time to think about it and I will come up with something brilliant. And that can be really hard to, build up that reputation and, just really articulate that, hey, you know what, I need, a few moments or I need a day, let me give that some thought and I will come up with something great.
Yeah, that's an important tactic. A big part, and this is, a big part of staying present in those situations, this is where I really needed to cultivate a mindfulness practice and conscious breathing because what would happen, I mean, part of the tactics or just in those situations is sometimes there's attacks or there's like, well, what about this and what about this, and then it's bouncing around, it's going too fast for my introvert brain because I want to process everything that's happening, and you know I'm still working on some point that's brought up 3 points ago, and they're just bouncing around, and that's kind of how they achieve whatever impact they're trying to achieve. It's not about let's go into depth on each of these points. So that's where I had to found I found that breathing and mindfulness would allow me to allow all these things to be and then kind of sit back and say, okay, what is the best reaction in this situation? So, and I think that what you just said is a great suggestion, but I think mindfulness, if you're going to be a senior leader, anytime, any level of leader, when you're working with extroverts who might be bouncing around, when you kind of want to address everything and go through and process everything, that mindfulness can be a helpful technique.
Yeah, so let's talk more about that. What is it? What is mindfulness and how do you achieve it?
Yeah. So, it's I think that there's a lot of definitions out there. I think about it, there's a capacity to be quiet and still. And sometimes I've personally found it helpful to cultivate this feeling of stillness or peace in my meditation practice. We were talking just before this. I start every morning, and I have done for many years now. Used to be 10 minutes and 15 minutes, and in recent years it's been closer to 45 minutes or an hour. But it's it's very hard for you to do your best thinking if your mind is racing. So you need to develop this capacity to stop your thinking mind and ease into there's a lot of words for it, stillness or presence. Sometimes it's just focusing on your breath. But when you stop your thinking mind, there's this calmness that comes over you, and that gives you the capacity to do your best. This is actually where creativity comes from. It's where your best thinking comes from. It's where invention comes from. And this is something where it actually comes more natural to introverts because we're kind of naturally seeking out quiet situations. And that's another reason why a lot of our greatest writers and artists and scientists, even so Einstein, Thoreau, Whitman, think about those kinds of people, were introverts. So mindfulness is really a kind of a set of techniques to help you take these natural capacities, which you as an introvert may be more inclined to have, and bring them into the world with you. because what I found, and this goes back to, I was talking about originally, I felt like I could only be myself in my writing, and maybe some people have had a similar situation. I felt that way because I was able to sit down and be still enough and focus enough on that task where the best of, there was some stillness, there was some presence of mind, and this best part of myself would come out. And so there, when you go out and look for these practices, they would help you to do that, not just in an artificial situation with like meditation, or even as in doing your art is, I don't know if it's artificial, but it's just it's a segmented part of your life. And it's to try to bring that into your walks as you go out into the world. It's to bring it into your meetings with other people. And so the more that you do that, the more of the best of the you is available and comes out in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So on this show, we talk about the strengths of introverts, which we have been doing,
Hmm.
and needs that come along with that. We also bust myths. So is there a myth about introverts that you want to bust today?
Oh, sure. Yeah, always. Yeah, that silence is weakness. So that it reminded me of a story. This reminds me of a story of, I worked with a guy. He was the number two at our company, and he'd long worked with our CEO, and he mostly remained silent. But when he opened his mouth, it was so sharp, and you kind of had to watch out because he was a really sharp guy sometimes. So it was kind of nerve-wracking. And so we'd get in a meeting with him, and he would be, everyone would be debating around and he'd bouncing around, and you'd see him, and you could tell he was thinking and taking everything in. And at the end of the meeting, he would just give his opinion. And sometimes you didn't want to hear it. And other times he would just say, "This sounds good." So he just had that ability to, he also did this in one-on-one conversations too. And a lot of people found it unnerving because he had this ability to hold the pause and hold that silence. And you really couldn't tell, like, is he thinking? What is he or what is he thinking? Like it's kind of nerve-wracking. And then he was like, and he just, it didn't seem to care. And then sometimes you just say, okay. So that's one example of silence. I just heard an amazing story that Elizabeth Gilbert told on her podcast recently, with Glennon Doyle. And so Elizabeth Gilbert tells us the way she tells the story. She went to see Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen teacher in New York City, and she went with a friend of hers who's very nervous and has like always had some feeling, visible agitation, on, hands shaking, doing something, moving around, and she felt like, this is a whole audience of like kind of neurotic New Yorkers, and so it's very loud and boisterous in this auditorium, and then Thich Nhat Hanh came out on the stage, sits down, and so it's just, he was a pretty diminutive person sitting in a chair in front of this audience of like 1,000+ New Yorkers, and he doesn't say a word, and he just sits in stillness, kind of probably in the calm presence. And the way she described it, she was in the back, and she watches as people in the front row kind of settle, and then in the next row settle, and row by row, gradually the whole auditorium kind of tunes into this sense of calm, and it's like a contagion, and it flows all the way back to the very back of the row. And then she watched her friend calm down completely. She said, "It was just the most powerful person that I've ever seen."
Wow.
And
Yeah, so it's like the first person you described. That's kind of where the name Quiet and Strong came from, because I've had people react that way to me, that, you know, they perceive me as quiet, but then somebody told me, when you talk, people listen. And I've had that experience, as I'm sure you have. And it's like I I no longer think something's wrong with me. I'm very confident. But I realized that I'm never going to talk as much as my extroverted friends and colleagues because I'm going to think. And it's not a bad thing, but that was something that was kind of surprising to me. It's like, oh, well, you're not going to all of a sudden think out loud most of the time. You're still going to process things, and it's really a gift. And that, and people just, you have to be able to work with that and help people understand, because our teams are going to be made of introverts and extroverts. And this
Hmm.
communication piece is often the biggest challenge. If you don't understand it and you're an introvert and you're thinking and then sharing what's most important, and people around you, they're speaking in order to develop their ideas. If you don't understand that, you can feel marginalized. You can feel like, okay, I'm not a valuable contributor here. But if you learn to, prepare and speak up, you can be very powerful.
Absolutely. And yeah, I hear that suggestion prepare come up again and again, and that's why in part of my work, one of the things, both as a leader and as I've in my podcasting and newsletter writing, trying to share techniques to help leaders create structures that are more supportive of everyone, including extra introverts, and that does include giving time for preparation. So like I have an article I wrote about brainstorming, and basically brainstorming is a useless activity. It was one of the most humorous quotes in Susan Cain's book. That they said American businessmen must be insane to keep brainstorming the way it's practiced normally. So so you give people the idea in advance, the chance to come up with ideas. They bring so you're bringing in and discussing ideas that people have thought of beforehand. It works out much better for actually for both introverts and extroverts.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes depending on how it's done, brainstorming can be effective, but also recognize that sometimes people are going to come up with some great ideas outside of brainstorming. I know that some of my best ideas are just me wrestling with something for a while and letting my mind do its work, and I come up with something great, and brainstorming isn't always that for me.
That's right. And in the shower or on the train or
Yeah, yeah.
when the apple falls on your head.
Yeah, yeah. I figured that out, especially during the pandemic, because I was going into the office all the time. And, then all of a sudden I was just working from home. And that time in the car, that was some powerful time for me. Even though I didn't miss it, I didn't miss paying for gas and spending the time. But just that stepping away was a really powerful time for me to think.
That's a good point. Yeah, sometimes I used to dread that time, the commute time, but it is really good thinking and processing time.
Yeah. So tell us about your podcast.
Sure. So I went after this, once I had come up with all these realizations that I really wanted to help spread the word because I felt like there's such great content. How do I help this information reach people like me? And I thought of this as helping my 30-year-old self, and what would have wanted to hear and learn from that. And so that was really the kernel of the idea for the podcast. And so I've just started it last October, and I'm about 12 episodes in of interviews, and I have written content on there as well. But it's been an incredible journey, and I'm starting to, as I build momentum, I'm starting to talk to people like you. I spoke with Kayla Chung, yeah, the other day. I interviewed her on the podcast. She has the website Introvert Spring. I'm going to talk to Tracy Cooper, which he works on highly sensitive people. He's kind of an expert in that realm and writes about that for men, which is, you know, if you think you don't want to be known as an introvert, try being known as a highly sensitive person as a man. That's even even more challenging for a lot of people. So this it's honestly it's a real privilege to get to talk to people and spend this time, and I'm and I'm really happy to be part of getting this information out and spreading the message.
Yeah. So what's it called?
It is called the Powerful Introvert Podcast. And there's the story behind the name. Actually, one of my colleagues, I still work with her, once referred to me as a powerful introvert, and I said, "Ooh, I like that."
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, look at us, a couple introverts having a great conversation, enjoying it. We have a lot to say, and podcasting can really be a great medium for doing that. We're having a nice one-on-one conversation, but it's shared with many. And, it's a great idea or a great way to get our ideas out there.
Yeah, I agree that the one-on-one conversation is definitely a strength, and yeah, I totally agree. It's a great medium for that.
Yeah. So you talk a lot about leadership. And does leadership really belong to the loudest in the room?
It does it, and indeed, we're just suckers for that person, and especially in America. And it is very culturally tied, and that's one of those just those things. It really unlocked that idea, just that knowledge that this is culturally determined in Susan Cain's book, like really unlocked things for me when I first read about that. But it's our conditioning, and we give that loud, confident person the benefit of the doubt too often. Now, sometimes they're great and you should follow them, but there's some evidence that this is part of our cognitive biases. There's Kahneman and Tversky's Thinking Fast and Slow. We have these programs that were developed on the savannah over millions of years, and it probably was a good idea or a good bias to go with the loud, boisterous guy when you know you're being attacked or something. But it's just not a great heuristic for modern society today. And so I think, another version of this question is like, what is leadership? And I think it's a lot of things, but involves integrity, empathy, vision, and this ability to simplify the complexity of our situation into a story that a group can follow and helps them be more successful. It's that ability to provide strategic thinking and focus on the long term. And none of these things require volume.
Yeah. And it is a big myth. And I think that too many people are buying into it that, you do need to be the loudest in the room. But the funny thing to me, especially as I keep diving deeper into it, I don't think even though people believe it, I don't think that's what they want. I don't think
Hmm.
most people want the large and in charge leader. They do want
Yeah.
someone that's, as you're describing, more thoughtful, empathetic, being able to really do some strategic thinking. And it's just that's definitely a big myth out there.
One idea I hear as a counterpoint to that is that it's situational, or in that there are certain situations where, and I think it's maybe when there's the most uncertainty and people are fearful, sometimes someone standing up and just having complete confidence is reassuring. And maybe that's a lesson for introverted leaders or introverts, and to be sensitive to those situations and that realize that maybe there is a different response from you that's required.
Yeah. And you said earlier that a strength that you have and many introverts have is the ability to appear calm. And also you're talking about confidence. How do we gain confidence as an introverted leader?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, confidence is is comes from proving competence to yourself. And so if you have situations that are similar to what you're going through, and then you can look at those, recall those, and know that, I've done something like this before. And so for an introvert, it's really like it's getting those experiences and building building up enough of a history of the having those experiences to have confidence in the situation.
Yeah. And how do you look at professional growth, personal growth for introverted leaders?
So, yeah, and then this is kind of maps to how my journey has gone. It's about acceptance. It's like we've talked about, is recognizing, where you are, your strengths or weaknesses. And part of that sometimes is getting outside feedback. I think it was not until I had really strong outside feedback where I could realize, okay, this is truly where I am at. I couldn't fool myself that I was doing differently in a situation. And sometimes it's your failures that really confront you with where you're at, but also that mirror can come from really honest and supportive peer or mentor as well. Then I think the second part is clarity about what you want to achieve, where do you want to get, and it helps it if the program is truly yours, it's not somebody else's program that you're buying into. And then it's a matter of figuring out, okay, I know where I want to get to, so what kind of person do I need to be to achieve those things, or what capacities do I need that I don't have now? And then last is just doing the work and making the changes to become the person, which can't, when you talk about growth, that can be uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we said this, but our teams are going to be made up of introverts and extroverts in general. And what do you say to the leader out there, either introvert or extrovert? How do they get to know these different personality styles and strengths to keep building a solid team?
Sorry, like understanding the different types of personalities on their
Yeah,
team.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of introverts are naturally empathetic, naturally. And so what I'd say, particularly on the team, and especially if you're more comfortable one-on-one, that's really a great ground to establish connection and try to learn how to understand where different people on your team are coming from. And I actually think that extends to, as your role grows and you start working with people in different departments, you start working with people who, maybe you're encountering people who are more different from you. So that was kind of my journey. So I started out, you know, I, I started out writing code for a while, and so then I was working with engineers, and it's a pretty introverted crew. But as I started taking on management roles or these cross-functional roles, you start working with people in marketing and people in sales, and they start to be, it's more likely they're wired pretty differently from you. So working with them one-on-one, you really get to know them and their personality types. But this is also, by the way, one of the keys to your power as an introverted leader is you form these deep relationships with people around you and around your company. And then that becomes, like you mentioned before, when you do enter in one of these situations, how do you establish that trust and confidence in you? They've spent a bunch of time with you in these other situations, and so they've formed opinions of you and respect for you, and they bring that to you, and so they're gonna give you that grace and they're gonna give you that space to, and that, you start to see maybe where the guy I mentioned earlier was coming from. It's probably in his best interest to just let everyone, chat it all out. By the end of the meeting, he's formed a pretty sharp opinion about the way things need to go.
yeah, absolutely. Greg, you also say that self-care is non-negotiable for introverted leaders. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, self-care is an interesting concept because, I think on the surface you might think like self-care, like I brush my teeth,
Yeah.
I shower, and we know it's like sleep or exercise, obviously, but what we're really talking about is something a little deeper. It's really that more tender, maybe subconscious part of yourself, maybe a younger part of yourself that you may need to be a little more quiet and to tune into. It's kind of the deeper voice in you. And what happens if you're not taking care, if you're not listening to that voice and responding to that voice, in a sense, you're turning against that part of yourself. That's what not taking care of yourself means. And the the crazy thing is that undermines your self-confidence. So if you're a quieter person and you're trying to lead, you're naturally going to be doing some things that are more challenging for you. And that makes it extra important. So there are going to be some things that this inner part of yourself isn't cool with or maybe needs to be reassured about. You're it's important to you, but you're doing this, because you believe it's important. You want to have an influence on people. You want to maybe make things better for other introverts or, just make things better for everyone. So there are some certain circumstances where you're going to have to take yourself out of your comfort zone. And so those things can be challenging for that inner part of you. And that's why this level of self-care is important, to tune into that voice and really see what you need. So, and that's making sure you do have enough time for rest or breaks, or, this is where breathing comes in. You giving yourself more space and to kind of become aware of what, to tune back into that voice. And maybe you need to reassure yourself like, okay, well, I know this is kind of rough right now, but I'm here with you, and, we're gonna get through this, or we're gonna go get ice cream afterward, or whatever it is.
Did you have to learn like to manage your energy and take proper breaks and give yourself space? Did you have to learn how to do that?
I'm still working on it. Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
absolutely. Yeah, it's really challenging. So I do great at this on my own, and at home, and I'm fortunate that I get to work from home quite a bit. We do have an office. I go into the office, but I'm challenged when we have on-site meetings. So we'll get together for 3 days or 4 days, and this is super intense. And like the extroverts want to be like they're on starting 8 a.m. and they want to go to 10 p.m. Like we sit in these meetings till 5 or 6 p.m. and then they want to go to happy hour, and then we're going to dinner, and then we go to a bar afterwards. And you know, this, that's just not cool for an extrovert. That doesn't work. So,
Yeah.
you have to learn to say, okay, well, I'm going to go retreat for half an hour here, or I'm going to go take walks periodically. And, it's been an hour and a half. Like, hey, we need to take 5 minutes for a break or something. And so, you know, it's a little bit easier for me being in a leadership position, but I really think that these are things that I've watched people who are individual contributors open their mouths and say, "Hey, I could really use a break." I know that they're introverts too. So everyone can advocate for themselves, because it's half or more of us like who feel that way. And it's not right to let a minority or just even half of the population kind of make things more unpleasant for everybody else.
Yeah, for sure. And you just have to learn what you need and be able to articulate it and let people know, hey, I'm going to be my best if I have this. It's not strange or weird that I need this time alone. It's going to help me be better.
Indeed, that's right.
Greg, this has been a wonderful conversation. Is there anything else you want to add today?
Oh, yeah. So I I always have lots of different things. One thing I've been working on that's I wanted to mention is I've been working on an ebook called How to Secure Your Next Promotion in 90 Days. So it's really, this is a topic that I've spent a lot of my life thinking about, a lot of energy thinking about, and I got into mentorship after a while, and so I've really helped a lot of people think about that and get to the next level wherever they're at. And especially as an introvert, we might hesitate to take action for too long, and so you may not be rewarded like the way you should be. And so it's really about, supporting people in thinking about deciding what they want and then going out and get it. Because in my experience, it really comes down to a decision and something that you must have. And it's when you are that committed to an outcome in your mind, things just tend to flow naturally for you. And this is, I have the 90-day plan. I've seen it work as fast as 48 hours, like someone makes a decision. And that was actually my experience in a very particular situation where I made up my mind. I spoke to my boss. We talked to the CEO and we worked it out super fast. I've seen a lot of people do this in 90 days or less. Regardless, in that frame, you can commit to an outcome, and it's going to happen one way or another. It's going to happen at your current company. It's not always going to be the right place for you. If not there, it's somewhere else. But either way, you can set yourself on the path where you want to go. So
Yeah.
that's an ebook, and that's something I'm offering. If you join my Substack, subscribe, and send me a message, I will share that with you. It's all for free.
Awesome. That sounds great. And how can people find you and get to know your work a little better?
Yeah, I'm on Powerful Introvert, one word, .substack.com. If you go to Power and Play, also .substack.com, they go to the same place. Please, check out my articles. I've got a podcast there. I'm also on Apple and Spotify as Powerful Introvert. You'll find it.
Awesome. Thanks again, Greg. This has been a great conversation, and introverts can make amazing leaders.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, David.
Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you. I hope you take the time to explore other episodes and learn from other amazing guests. Remember, if you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there is now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the four-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link in the show notes. And I'd love to connect with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts and links to social media for Quiet and Strong and much more. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. So many great things about being an introvert, and so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.